There are enemies out to destroy the church, and do whatever you can to keep ammunition away from it.
Speculation and conjecture are not wisdom at the moment. To pray for the church.
Behold how lovely it is for brethren to dwell together in unity.
Is absolutely pastoral church abuse.
A slave to a man that you love.
Use God to make a bundle of cash.
There's no justice. They will always take the man's side.
I cannot get the sound of his voice out of my head.
There's just an incredible amount of silence.
The phenomenon of where you now go to churches and the object of the worship is the pastor rather than the mission of the church or God or Christ. It's wrapped around a personality rather than the charisma of the pastor wrapping it around the mission of what the church should stand for, and that's Christ and God.
The church is a monarchy. There are no checks and balances. It's nothing like any institution that we're familiar with.
I'm Whitney Bond. I'm 28 years old. I'm from East St. Louis, Illinois. I'm currently a second-year student at Candler School of Theology, where I'm doing a concentration in the Black Church Studies program and Women Ministry and Theology. As I move forward with practical theology, I will definitely have one foot in the church and one foot in the world, because I've realized in my 28 years of living that I'm able to converse with people of all walks of life, and that my full work will never be completed in the church, and my full work will never be completed in the world either.
I'm Caroline Paris. I'm 30 years old. I'm from Columbus, Georgia. I graduated from Candler School of Theology at Emory University. I concentrated my studies in pastoral care.
My mission in life and in ministry is to bring healing, meaning, purpose, and joy to others through establishing authentic relationships and/or the arts.
As a divinity student, I'm always questioning the things that go on inside the church. And one thing that has always kind of flustered me is, how can these things go on and they're so wrong, and yet so many people don't do anything about it? And so as I study this topic of power and abuse, I realized that so many people are loyal and trustworthy to their spiritual leaders, and they forget that they are humans too. I think there are so many people to blame, not just the leaders in these positions. And so I also believe that it's a worldwide issue that crosses genres of religion. And so I guess I'm left with the two questions. One, do we give spiritual leaders too much power? And how do we stop this abuse of power?
There ain't nothing new about people using religion to enrich themselves. That's happened as long as there's been time. They call it con men. Snake oil salesmen, pimps. Ain't nothing new about that. What's new is that people are accepting that.
You're a fraud and an insult to this church and God.
I am God. I was just listening about how all these pastors, and not just urban churches and white churches, getting indicted for tax fraud and all these other things. And I was like, no one's telling the truth, man. Some of these guys are hustlers. They're street hustlers. They're street dudes.
Pastors are in the enviable position because you change lives. And so when people are coming to you, telling you how you inspire them, how you've changed their life, how they turned over a new leaf, and yes, they give credit to Jesus, but you were the vessel that did it. And I don't care who you are. You got a ton of people screaming your name and you're laying them out, slaying them in the Holy Spirit. That is a big ego booster.
Never does it say in the Bible we're supposed to have one leader outside of Christ or God. It says we're supposed to be a community of believers who come together. And yes, we do have spiritual leaders who lead us, but they should not be the only source of power in a church. I am on my way to interview Anthony Beatles about his journey in the church. He was once considering becoming a pastor, but during the training process, actually decided he wanted to leave the church.
What do you think makes that dynamic between congregants and pastors where it's almost hero-like? Why is that?
He's lifted up. He's behind the podium. He has the message that is going to save everybody, right? So can you imagine, you're 21, 22 years old, and all you want to do is you want to heal the world. And so when the bishop says, hey, young man, and this is what he told me and a friend of mine, when I go visit these churches, I want you guys to ride with me. I just want you to, really start to become a part of what's going on. When the bishop says something, you feel like, okay, God must have spoke to him to tell me that it's time. Yeah. So I felt like, man, this is time. This is it. All I want to do is hold his Bible.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Just take care of the man that's taking care of the people.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I'll be the man that takes care of people.
The Brewers were pillars in Bishop Paulk's church. They filed a suit asking for unspecified money, saying Paulk sexually abused Mona for 14 years, convincing the church singer that she was chosen by God to comfort him sexually.
Sometimes when women are vulnerable and they are not sure of themselves, not concrete in what they believe biblically or spiritually, they're easily influenced by men who say, well, you were sent here by God to be this special person in my life.
And we're taught, societally and culturally that if there's someone who's a leader, then we give this sense of wisdom to them, right?
And trust.
And trust, and so we expect them to lead us well.
Pastors that are performing have like rock stars. I mean, it's, you have visiting pastors that come into these churches. They have a writer, they have bodyguards, they have the basic treatment, the standard writers that Lil Wayne would have when he goes into a city to perform.
I'm not going to allow myself to be drawn into the court of public opinion. Because one day, every knee got to bow.
Anytime you think Jesus went to Calvary and died to get you a new Lexus, something wrong with your religion. Or that he rose so you could have a house with more bedrooms that you could sleep in, something wrong with your religion. And I think that we have fallen prey to that. Whereas in days before my time, we would look at guys like Father Divine and Daddy Grace and them, or Reverend Ike. Today, we have people that are more polished, but the bottom line reads the same.
The alleged victim in Clayton County told police that the man she'd been having sex with recently told her he has HIV. In the police report, the victim says Davis told her, with HIV, you can still live, and it's not the end. The woman also told police Davis was a pastor at a big church, and when she asked him why he didn't tell her, he advised because the Lord had told him to be still.
When I was 17 and a senior in high school, I met a priest who was, he was going for his master's in pastoral counseling at Iona College. And he would talk to me, kid around with me. I trusted him and I liked him. And he said, well, why don't we set up some sessions and we can meet in the rectory. When I'd leave the session, he'd walk me to the door with his arm around me. And then another time, he'd hug me goodbye. And the hug eventually, in a couple of months, turned into a kiss. And then he told me how special I was and how pretty I was, and that he was thinking about getting a dispensation from celibacy. And he started having sex with me in the rectory. And I thought he was going to leave the priesthood. I just wanted somebody to love me.
Their power is straight manipulation. That's the art. Pimps, they manipulate. And they prey on the low self-esteem. They prey on the ignorant. They prey on, and I don't say that everybody goes to church and loves their pastor, that they're ignorant or they suffer from low self-esteem. But they can seek out. They know they're very good. Some of them, not all of them, are very good at picking out who they can pretty much, for lack of a better word, take advantage of.
There's a verse that speaks of, touch not thine anointed, and people take that verse and kind of switch it around to make it seem as if you can't say anything to your spiritual leader. but I think we're all held accountable to some form of correction. I believe there are pitfalls with leadership in the church, mainly for two reasons. One being ego, and two being lack of accountability. They get caught up in themselves, and they don't feel like they have to be accountable to anyone, whether it be their congregants, the people in their communities. And so they get caught up in all kinds of things that are not reflective of the God that I serve at all.
What was interesting is before I got behind the scenes, I would just be able to go into the church. I'd be able to love on the people and, hey, what's going on, sister so-and-so? And, and it was always this genuine feeling. And I felt like I was there for the God experience. When I became part of the working church, then it's totally different. So now you start to see what goes on behind the scenes. You start to hear the secretary over the phone, and she isn't so pleasant. And you start talking to the pastor, and he's upset because people aren't paying tithes, and that's what they're here for, and the message isn't really free. And that began to, it started discouraging me.
Yeah, I think that some denominations look at the leader of the church as the hero, as Jesus himself. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of leaders feed off of that and do have these egos. If they are Jesus, they are God, and they say, this is what the Bible says, this is what you have to believe to be a person of faith. So what was it that ultimately made you decide to stop your training?
The junior pastor, he was preaching this message, and I really looked up to the pastor. The message was the accumulation, or how to accumulate wealth within the kingdom. All of a sudden he said, hey, I want everybody to stand up on your feet. Everybody stand up on your feet. And he said, I want you to put your hands in the air like this and make a bucket. And he said, I want you to pray, money come to me. And he just kept saying it. He kept saying it. And it seemed as if everybody was just kind of in this trance. There was just such a disconnect with me that I said, man, this is not, it's not where I need to, this is not where I need to be.
I'll be meeting with David and Barbara, who are both victims of being abused by priests in the Catholic Church. They have taken their pain and turned it into action, and I'm very interested in hearing their stories.
I'm David Clossy. I'm the executive director of SNAP. I've been involved for about 24 years. SNAP stands for the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. I'm a father and a husband, and I was abused for a period of about 4 years, roughly age 11 or 12 through age 16 by a priest. I grew up in a large devout Catholic family. All of us were very, very involved in the church. One particular priest took a great interest in me, took me camping, skiing, hiking, canoeing, and he would always abuse me late at night. Often it started when I was asleep. We'd be in a tent or in a hotel or somewhere, and I would wake up and find him on top of me, rubbing up against me, that sort of thing. The next morning, I would wake up with absolutely no recollection of it whatsoever, none. So I would go on trips with this priest sometime for a week. And I'd come home and I'd burst in the door with a huge smile on my face and tell my folks about what a wonderful trip I had.
It was my best friend's uncle. He was the priest in our parish. Joni lived across the street from me. He would call my mother, and my mother would make me put on my best dress and send me to church. I was about 6 the first time he raped me. And he said he had been sent by God to save my soul because I was an evil child. And that day I had disobeyed Mom. It went on for about 7 years that he would rape Joni and myself. And, he'd always say, you're evil, you've done bad things. And I think, yeah. And never really figured out that, the punishment was totally inappropriate or, criminal.
You are a former member of the Roman Catholic clergy. Can you tell us the circumstances around which you actually left the priesthood?
Well, after 12 years in the monastery and 6 years as a priest, all 6 years I was assigned to follow perpetrators. I came to the conclusion in my early 30s that if I wanted to be a defense lawyer and to defend child abusers the rest of my life, that was going to be my next 40 years. It's been part of the culture all the way back to the Didache in 60 AD, and that there have been constant attempts by the popes over the years to curtail the problem, but it's never, ever been snuffed out. It's childhood sexual abuse by the clergy and by bishops is literally seems to be in the DNA of the Roman Church.
So today I'm getting a chance to meet with Killer Mike, who is a major hip hop artist, community activist. He definitely does not hold any punches back. He speaks his mind, and I'm so excited about getting a chance to meet him today.
Hey, I've been familiar with the abuse scandals with the Catholic Church for most of last 20, 25 years, nothing else. And the Roman Catholic Church is probably the most powerful and organized church or state in the world. So I think that you hear about them in a manner that they see fit to hear about them, just because when you got a 2,000-year publicity campaign, your web into where you can push buttons is going to be a lot deeper than some black guy in a 7-button suit with a Protestant church on your local highway in any black city in America.
My name is Bunny Jackson Ransom. I own and operate a company called First Class Incorporated. It's about 40 years old. We are a marketing firm. Marketing is a nebulous term, but we do specifically media relations. In other words, we get people in the news or keep them out, depending upon their point of view. I'm known as the Olivia Pope. I fix things. I take great pride in fixing things. There's a rule that says when somebody is knocking at your door because you got a phone call, you know a crisis is coming. If CNN starts to call you, you know you got a heavy media crisis. You remember Jimmy Swaggart? Well, now that crisis occurred in 1988, I believe. He had his first crisis then. It was male to woman. It wasn't male to male. There was another church crisis, Earl Polk. His was male to woman. And those kinds of church crises can be, or seem to be, forgiven more so than the one that Ted Haggard had. His was male to male when he got caught with a male prostitute.
Ted Haggard seemed to be a devoted husband. He was married with 5 children and pastor of Colorado's New Life Church, but he was living a double life.
He had a relationship with me. We had gay sex.
When Mike Jones, a self-confessed male prostitute, went public with claims that Haggard had paid for sex and drugs, Haggard initially denied it.
Do you know Mike Jones?
No, I do not know Mike Jones.
Haggard eventually admitted that some of the claims made by Jones were true. He was banished from his church.
I was a teacher in my parish school, and I caught our parish priest in the act of molesting a child. I was a good Catholic, assumed all I had to do was tell, and he'd be gone, all would be well, the kid would be helped, everything would be fine, and none of that was true. I told my pastor, who believed me, but I couldn't get him removed, I couldn't get him away from kids, I couldn't get him exposed, I couldn't get the police to take a report, I couldn't get the Division of Family Services to take the report. And I knew that he would go on molesting kids, and all they were going to do was move him to another parish.
Despite allegations he abused dozens of boys, the founder of the Legionaries of Christ, Father Marcial Maciel, was a favorite of Pope John Paul II and other Vatican officials.
I think Father Maciel used money the way some politicians do in spreading it liberally to buy support.
And when these men and other former Legion members brought allegations to the Vatican that they had been abused as boys by Father Maciel, nothing happened for 6 full years.
I believe that the number is 98% of children are molested by someone they know and trust, by someone the family knows and trusts. And Catholic children especially are taught from the very beginning, the priest is God's representative on earth and, is not to be questioned.
We have to do our homework.
Yeah.
We're kind of anticipating that, the leader has our best interest in mind, and they're doing exactly what they say that they're going to do, and we'll follow them for 10, 15, 20 years only to find out that, again, he was just as human as we were. And if we would have done some research, if we would have developed our own personal relationship with God, we'd probably be in a much better situation. There'd probably be a lot more transforming going on, because we are reading, we are studying to show ourselves approved, we are rightly dividing the word as it says in the Bible.
My mother was so proud Father picked me. Father was going to spend time with me, that this was an honor. Many parents are thrilled when their children are hanging out at church as opposed to a street corner or getting into trouble. So there's all these expectations of the church being a safe place, a haven, a good experience, a good role model. And we give that automatically to anybody in clerical garb, as opposed to evaluating them one-to-one and, hey, this is just a man or a woman, and, have they earned the right to our trust?
They're allowed to have no sex at all. In Catholic theology, celibacy is considered a gift from God. So I think that there are young Catholic men who are very devout, but they have these very frightening sexual urges that they know are wrong. And so they go into the priesthood hoping to essentially make a deal with God, and they say, God, I will serve you in your church forever, and you will in turn give me this gift of celibacy so I don't act on these frightening sexual urges that I feel.
Celibacy was not part of the institutional church or part of the Catholic tradition until late on, like the 12th or 13th century. And the reason that it became an issue was that there were married priests at that time, and the married priests had children, male children, so that when the priest would die, the property that was accumulated in that parish went to the son. Now, the church realized they were losing both property as well as wealth. And so, if priests could be celibate, at their death, that property would transfer to the church.
I think sexual deviancy is probably more of a behavioral problem. I think it starts for different people at different times. Like, for example, myself, I was exposed to pornography when I was 7 years old, very explicit pornography on many occasions. And over the years, as a young child developing, that kind of became your norm. And sadly, it put me on the wrong road early on of objectifying women.
I would say that a fair number of victims that I've worked with have reported having been sexually abused in a church setting. And I think that part of that is because that sex offenders seek positions of power and trust in order to find victims.
In a Philadelphia courtroom today, a high-ranking Catholic clergyman learned he is heading to jail for covering up a sex abuse scandal in his church.
Monsignor William Lynn, the first official in the Catholic Church convicted of a crime for shielding priests known to be predators, learned today he'll have to pay a 3 to 6 year penance behind bars.
I have a brother who's a priest, right, and who molested kids himself. But before I knew that, back when my brother and I were still talking, he said to me a comment that still chills me to this day when I recall it. He said, look, he said, the priesthood, it's a tiny, shrinking, beleaguered club of very, very lonely men who have sworn allegiance to one bishop in one diocese where they're going to work forever, their whole lives. And he said, we all know who drinks too much and who takes money from the collection plate and who cruises gay bars and who hits on female parishioners. We all know that. But we're never, ever going to blow the whistle on each other. Because again, we're sworn to work with this group of men for the rest of our lives.
Now, we used to think that most sex offenders had been sexually abused because they reported that they had been sexually abused. However, when these offenders were polygraphed, then the rate went down to 27%. So the thinking is that perhaps they said that they had been sexually abused in a way to gain some sympathy from the therapists and other people working with them so that maybe they could understand, why they had committed their offense.
There was never a day that I woke up and said, you know what, I'm gonna go molest this victim. And in fact, being here at Medlin Treatment with all the other offenders that I'm around and having been in prison around all the other various offenders, never met one of them that wanted to commit their crime.
A predator, they have a certain pattern that they all do. And for him, it started, let me captivate you. You wanna get a pretty girl? Show a pretty ring, show a pretty watch, show a pretty necklace, show a pretty car. Got your attention. Okay, now that I got your attention, let me talk to you, let me friend you. Let me show you what I really can do. Now I show you who I am is powerful. Now on top of that, let me alienate you from everything you knew and everything everybody else taught you. Let me groom you. Now, After I groom you, you're not allowed to talk to females because I don't want a female to mess up your mind into what I'm doing. I need to keep you isolated.
Grooming is a way that child molesters get close to children, and it involves spending time with the child, doing special things for the child, and getting the child and the child's parents to trust them so that they're able to have the opportunity to offend.
Eddie Long's church knew a crisis was coming. Whenever something like this happened, there's a need for forgiveness on both sides. This was the problematic situation with the Eddie Long crisis. Guilty or not, the men who accused him needed to be forgiven. Guilty or not, he needed to be forgiven. So there's the let's forgive first, if you're a church, and then let's identify the crisis, and then let's get to the truth as much as we can. Your PR person, your lawyer is someone you don't lie to, because we can help you with a crisis if we know what it is, if we know all the ramifications of it.
Just got a call that I'll be going to the Bahamas to meet with Santino Kemp, who is a part of this major sex scandal with a mega church here in Atlanta. So I'll be traveling to the Bahamas to meet with him and see how all of this has changed his life since then.
I felt, personally, I felt violated. I remember just going back and crying and asking God, why did this happen to me? What did I do? And he gave me $5,000 in cash that night. I felt like a prostitute.
I feel like Goliath, David rather, facing Goliath. There's a giant in front of me, but I am going to fight, and I'm going to fight vigorously, and I got 5 rocks, and I haven't thrown one yet.
Tonight, an I-Team exclusive. New revelations in the sex scandal surrounding Bishop Eddie Long. The Fox 5 I-Team reveals the identity of another accuser.
He asked me my age, and he'd never seen me before. So I told him my age, and I was 16, and he was shocked that I was in college. And he had a mentoring program for guys who were in trouble, so he thought it would have been a good idea for me to come there and give them some encouraging words and stuff. So that's why we exchanged numbers. We got up there to the hotel, and I was raped. I felt like it was something I did. Like maybe this was brought on because of something I did. And then as we started to text and I started to confide in him, I fell in love with my rapist. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what happened. Then I was dependent on him, and we just built a bond. And I knew I was wrong for what I was doing, but he just had like power over me.
If an adult is not charming and charismatic and warm and outgoing and lovable, number one, no parent is going to trust that man around their kids, and number two, no kid is going to want to be around him. So the very attributes that we admire in adults and make us like them and trust them are the very attributes that they use to prey upon kids.
I still want my pain to stop. I would love to, and I got to keep going back to my therapy because it's just ridiculous. It really is. But it's just not enough anymore. Like, I thought I could cover the pain up. I thought I could move, start over, and everything would go away. I was terribly wrong.
When you think about in American culture, what are the 3 things that we're not supposed to talk about? You know, sex, politics, and religion. So then you put 2 of those together. This sexual abuse that is happening in the churches or is happening in somehow in a religious context. For those who are, religious or devoted to their religion, are so all-encompassing. They're so part of who we are and our personalities. And when you have those infected in this way and so intertwined, it's not hard to understand why these victims go through so much.
I can guarantee you today, if you were to bring that particular man and ask him to look at me in my eyes, he can't do it. Because he knew what he did. It killed my spirit to watch a person throw me into a glass black my eye, and be crowned king, and then shun me.
I am not a perfect man.
After attending a service in which Bishop Long addressed allegations of sexual misconduct, Brown said he is considering leaving the church.
He was unable to say that he was 100% guilt-free. And I'm a person of truth and reality, so it was sort of insulting.
And the way he walked off, and the way I saw the people stand up and applaud this man, how dare you?
You know, children don't have a formal group of rights that individually protects them from adult caregivers, caretakers, or people who are influencing their life. So their abuses can be pushed and held silent longer because people are going to tend to believe the adult first. So if you don't have people advocating on behalf of rights for children, abuse can run rampant, because when you look at the abuses that are taking place, it's usually the young, or it's the minors, kids who don't have the ability or don't have the advocacy out there.
There is a real stigma for boys who've been sexually abused to come forward, many times because they are afraid that people will think that they're gay, or they are afraid that people will think that they're going to be an abuser.
There's a need for forgiveness, there's a need for healing, and there's a need to let the grace of God permeate in the church. We're talking about a church crisis, not a corporate crisis. So as church people, we believe in forgiving and healing and moving on.
He's not that kind of person.
What kind of person is he?
He is a man who has helped out many, and I think that those who begin to judge him should wait until it all comes out. He's not that kind of person. Well, based on what I know, he's not that kind of person.
Are you defending the hustle he sold you? Are you defending the nice shirt you like? What are you really defending? Because if you can identify what you're defending, it'll allow you to say, let me separate what I'm defending from the criminal, wrongful, unjust, insane, perverse acts that this man did, or this man has been accused of doing, or that he settled out of court and quietly admitted he did some of. Whatever the case, the fact that he was willing to take the plea showed me a certain level of guilt, and I'm not willing to mix that level of guilt with my spiritual well-being for eternity.
He said he was going to fight like David fought Goliath.
Right.
He was going to be vindicated. Mm-hmm. He settled out of court.
My heart was broken with the Eddie Long situation, and anybody who remembers, I went off on a tear-filled rant on The View.
Say you have God in your life. If you are right, you're going to be vindicated. God is not going to let your church fall. He's not going to let you go bankrupt. So when you settle out of court, it just says something was wrong. And it makes me very angry, because people prey on women who don't have a man in their life, who take their sons to people in authority that they trust.
If you came to me from the church and you said, I want to raise up your boy and I want to teach him how to be a man, a strong black man, I don't care if those boys didn't like you. So I'm trusting you with my hearts. And I felt like there's a lot of single women now who are like, if I can't take you to church to have men raise you up and teach you things that I can't, then where am I going to take you?
You know, Jesus never took a plea. So if that's the standard we're holding you to, then that's the standard I got to hold you to. Like, Jesus never took a plea deal. He could have took a plea deal and got off the cross. If you took a plea deal, to me, you step down that day. If you want to be a minister, go minister to bears in the forest. Become a monk. If you love the Lord that much, go minister to grass. Go minister to trees, every other living thing. But you are never to be trusted with young boys again. And, you know, my personal opinion, that's from a religious perspective. My personal opinion, if you abuse religious power, you should die immediately. Because you're playing with what someone sees to be internal. My soul is eternal. After this body leaves, after this flesh is over, what truly belongs to the universe, what truly belongs to God, is my soul. How anyone could see that as an act that they could bag or forgive in terms of him leading the congregation is nothing short of stupidity to me. I can't call it ignorance. I can't call it blind faith. I'm calling it stupid. It makes as much sense as you going to a church that's headed by a guy named Lucifer who used to have an address in heaven.
I love the fact that Killer Mike said this was a very strong statement that I didn't agree with, but I still really loved it, because he said, you know, from a religious standpoint, he said, I think we need to offer forgiveness to perpetrators. He said, from a personal standpoint, I want to kill him. Mm-hmm. He said, I think they should die. And I really appreciate that he differentiates the fact between this is how I feel personally and this is religious.
Crises are usually dealt with by the media if Eddie Long's PR people had been on it when they started talking about the bad things. Immediately you give the media positive information. And there's so much positive work that New Birth has done in that community, in the whole region. So answering the media questions with, well, I understand why you're here, but what you should be asking me about is all of the good things that New Birth has done. That's what I mean about bridging. Bridging from a negative question to a positive answer that you want to give. If you give that positive answer while the camera is rolling, it's going to be on the news. Right? Right.
It's very difficult to talk about if I would stay in a church that's broken, because I do think every church is broken in different ways. A lot of times I have called some of my friends who aren't in ministry and said, I don't want to be in ministry because there's so much brokenness in it. There's so much brokenness in the church and in Christian communities, and some of my best friends have said that's exactly why you have to stay. I wouldn't be a part of a Christian community that was intentionally hurting people and the leaders weren't changing. If those leaders were removed and I could be a part of the healing and transformation of that community, then I would stay.
Adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse are at an increased risk of suicide and self-harming behaviors.
About 1 in the morning, 1 or 2 in the morning, when he came up to my bedroom and he just broke down. I said, then you have to make me understand. You have to help me to understand. And that's when he told me that Father James Funky was sexually abusing him. And we're able to interview about 20 boys based on that. And but they were all over the age of 18 and would not testify. They didn't want anybody to know what had happened to them. So it was almost a year later that Father Funky was convicted and sentenced to prison. Well, he pled guilty and was sentenced to prison. It was 3 years later, after they were sentenced, that Steve went into a real bout of depression in December, and under a doctor's care on medication for his depression, he took a gun and shot himself through his heart and died. He had just turned 21 5 days before.
Just listening to that story was just so heartbreaking, because his mother did so much to try to protect him, and his sister, on the other hand, did not want anything to do with his mother or any of the allegations against the priest, and thought that her mother was actually bringing more shame to their family. That also helped me realize that sometimes victims do want to come forward, but because they don't have the support system, they don't have SNAP, they don't have mothers who will fight tooth and nail so that justice is brought forward, that they will just hold on to these secrets and carry them around for years.
It is true that about 90% or higher of sexual abuse crimes never get reported or disclosed. And I believe that's because many times the victims are so embarrassed and ashamed about the abuse. They're afraid that people will not believe them. Sometimes they're afraid that the offender will hurt them. Sometimes they think that it will tear their family apart, that they'll be put in foster care, or perhaps that they don't want the offender to go to jail, and they're protecting the offender. So there can be many, many different reasons why children don't disclose sexual abuse. But I routinely hear that in my practice, that children are afraid to tell.
He was sexually abused by a trusted teacher and then was shunned by his community as he tried to get justice.
Yossi's loss of innocence came at age 15, shortly after he dropped out of religious school. Hoping to get him back on track, his family enlisted the help of Herschel Taubenfeld, a jovial, well-respected, and connected teacher.
He told me that he has the ability to read the palm of my hands, and I was fascinated, so I told him, go ahead, tell me.
But soon, Yossi's life coach started to read other parts of his body.
Every time he dared to touch more sensitive parts of my body and private parts.
Others who had reported abuse were socially ostracized, kicked out of schools, and in some cases, their family businesses were even boycotted. In fact, Yossi claims his attacker is still free to ruin more innocent lives. Is Mr. Taubenfeld still here at the yeshiva?
Yes.
Incredibly, multiple students told us Taubenfeld remains in the classroom at one of New Square's biggest religious schools.
Very nice. He's the best.
So 2 months later, Yossi would sum up the courage to do something no one else has dared to do in the history of New Square. He reported the abuse to Ramapo police.
When does it become the church's problem? I just couldn't see how they could disconnect the two so easily when this is a school that preaches and teaches about a loving God, but you have these violations taking place by men who are supposed to be representatives of God.
He was charged with 30 misdemeanor counts of forcible touching, endangering the welfare of a child, and third-degree sex abuse, signaling the first prosecution of a pedophile from New Square. But this trailblazing case would come to an unexpected end, never making it to trial. Instead, the teacher turned rabbi turned convicted pedophile avoided jail time in exchange for 6 years probation.
Psychological research around sexual abuse within the church is almost non-existent. My professional opinion on why that is the case is these are closed systems. There's so many barriers to accessing these organizations and getting at the root of this problem. In order to gain access to these victims and these perpetrators is very difficult, especially when you want to do it from the psychological perspective. And the little bit of psychological research that has been done, particularly with perpetrators within the religious community, the clinical samples are so small. There's so few people that to gain access to that the findings are not generalizable to the greater population.
I believe that sexual offending is a choice. And that clients, well, I refer to them as clients, but that offenders choose how they behave and that they can choose whether or not they're going to reoffend. We spend a lot of time focusing on breaking through that denial and helping the client see that a child or a young teenager cannot consent to sexual activity with an adult.
I would never say that I'm cured, but again, I also don't consider this an illness. I consider this a set of bad choices and bad behavior that goes along with those bad choices. So in context, if a sex offender has gone through therapy, takes his responsibility for what they did and understands all the damage that they caused and what caused them to get to do that, and takes all the proper steps to avoid the things that can cause them problems again, I believe there's a 100% success rate in never reoffending again. But it's like an alcoholic. You have to wake up every day and realize this is a new day. It's a new journey. I've got to make all the right decisions today. I know where the pitfalls are at. I've got to stay away from those things, and I've got to stay the course.
For me, it's been this abuse of power, of people who are older and supposed to be wiser, preaching messages of exclusivity or of morals or legalism to younger people. So for me in my ministry, I feel very called, if I can use that word. I feel very pulled to be able to say to them that our faith is not black and white. It's a faith that's gray. Questions are part of our faith. And showing them that God's love isn't exclusivity, that it's about a radical inclusivity.
I saw God as a God that embraces all. And I saw the community as a way and means of which we could spread this love of God. But I also saw the hierarchical church as a place where this couldn't happen. I stayed with them for 23 years. For the first 12, I had a wonderful religious life. But for the last 11, I had to work with men in the church. And that changed my whole perspective of who we were as a people. And that was when I realized, in the eyes of the hierarchy, not the church, the hierarchy, I was not considered a full person.
Women have a right to be ordained. It's just not a man's game.
Here I am. I am ready.
So she's joined the Roman Catholic Women Priests movement. Small but growing, it claims women were clerics in the early church.
Women are answering God's call, and justice is rising up in the Roman Catholic Church.
I attend a church that is very progressive, very conscious, very forward-thinking. but that hasn't always been my experience. Having been involved in the church my entire life, I've had personal experiences where I've gone to minister to different places where, oh, you're a woman, so you can't have on pants in our church, or you can't preach the gospel because you're a woman. You are limited to these roles.
Men can be ordained, only men. And I began to question that teaching. Why wouldn't women be ordained? Don't we profess that we are created equal?
It was very clear from a young age. Women were to be on the mothers and the matrons board, prepare communion, do all of these super religious and sacred things, but never step foot in the pulpit. And so when you walk into my home church, there's the center where it's the pulpit, and then on each side there are like these mini, I guess, little pulpits, whatever. And that's where the women give the church announcements. Or if you're a visiting minister, I've had friends who are ordained, who have been to seminary, you know, the whole shebang, and they have to speak
from
the outside. So from a young age, I saw that division and I never understood it.
One thing I say a lot to students is the number one thing that made me not want to join the Christian faith were other Christians. And I think that is so problematic, because we should care so much, love so much, be so radically inclusive of all people that other people want to be a part of it. But that's not the case.
It's not.
So I'm on my way to Clark Atlanta University to interview Dr. Philip Dunstan. We're going to be talking about the responsibility of a pastor in a church and about forgiveness.
I am Dr. Philip Dunstan. I have served as the professor of religion here at Clark Atlanta, chair of the department, for about 18 years. I have also served as spiritual leader, counselor, pastor in the Black church for over 20 years. I was told by a spiritual leader that I had a call on my life. I think there is quite a bit of responsibility put on spiritual leaders, particularly in the Black community. We have always revered our preachers, pastors, spiritual leaders almost as gods. And anytime you're put on that kind of pedestal, the expectation for you to live up to that is great. People expect more out of spiritual leaders, and whether it's fair or right, it's just the way it is.
Dr. Philip Dunstan at CAU says that being in ministry, being a pastor of some sort, is one of the most top difficult careers that a person can have. I do agree with that in some ways, because as we learn at Candler, there is the real possibility of burnout. We just are constantly wanting to give and care for and feel very passionate about that.
That personal self-care is always minimized. Like, oh, let me go check on the bereaved. Let me go and visit the sick. Let me go, versus checking in with themselves, because if we don't take care of ourselves, nobody is going to.
There's a class at Candler that you have to take if you can before you graduate. It's called Vocational Discernment.
Okay, so I'm trying to take that.
But Ellen,
yes,
you have to take it. I was working at the church when I took that class, and I was almost burnt out. I'd given everything, and I'd not put up any boundaries. So I thought, oh, we need to give everything. Well, we can't give everything and still be good ministers and still be good caregivers. And that class taught me that if I didn't stop and put up some boundaries, I was going to burn out, and it wasn't going to be anyone else's fault. It was going to be my own.
There was a survey done in America about 10 years ago. It's one of the most difficult jobs in the world. The leader of the free world, president, CEO of companies, and I think spiritual leaders, pastors was the third.
I think everything in moderation is our barometer on, when enough is enough, because at the end of the day, and this is kind of what I wanted to project with Preachers of LA, preachers and pastors and leaders and bishops, they're all human and subject to fail, to falter.
The show explores the lives of 6 preachers beyond the pulpit. And these aren't your mama's preachers.
I've been divorced now for 20 years. The question is asked, do I think I'll ever remarry? And my response is, I don't know.
My goal in bringing, the show to life was really to bring an opportunity to give preachers a platform and a voice to say, hey, I'm human. Take me off this pedestal and allow me to rest and walk where you walk.
People put you up on a pedestal that you can't live on. Pastors are people just like everybody else.
A lot of times, spiritual leaders are under more attack from those who are inside the body than for entities outside of the body. So it kind of magnifies the attack. It causes sometimes them to step outside of, the will of God and do things in retaliation. It just causes them sometimes to break down. Over 1,500 pastors a month are leaving the ministry just due to burnout.
I think it's been initially difficult for people to digest the humanness of the pastor, if you will, because a lot of people, I think they like the juxtaposition of the pulpit to the pew, the mystique behind their pastor, and now you get to see another layer.
You're tempted to abuse your power because so many people depend on you. You're most readily interacting with people a lot of times in their most vulnerable moments.
I think that so long as we choose to belong to a church, we are unfortunately choosing to belong under a microscope. I think that people are looking for ways to say that Christians are hypocrites and that they are not doing what they are saying they're doing. Because I think a lot of people have been hurt by the church. I think a lot of people have been hurt by people of faith.
I'm not sure if people, believers in the church, are always quick to forgive those who fall. I think we want to forgive them. We want to make sure that all is right because we don't want to see our leader in error. So I kind of feel like it's a 50-50. There are those that, are ride or die for their pastor. And then there are those that are, I told you so.
Miles Monroe, he said, young man, God used people in mysterious ways. And you may not know that God is using you, but God is using you. Even though with all this that's going on, God will get the glory out of it.
What I do know is that people need a reason to fellowship. People need a reason to love one another. People need a place to be safe, to cry. People need a place to not confess their sins, but to be forgiven when they walk in the door. People need a place where other people wish to honor the God in them. And that's what church should be. And if your church isn't that, then you aren't in church.
I just think the church is built on the idea of forgiveness. And a lot of times that's an opportunity for a church to actually show forgiveness to the world.
I think that it's a big ask for us to say everyone should forgive the perpetrator. Because while I can say out loud, I like to think that we have a God who's big enough that forgives all people, I don't think it's my place to ask other people to forgive. Mm-hmm.
Especially when it's the person who
has been abused. And if it were one of my loved ones who was abused, I wouldn't expect them to forgive. I think that only each individual person can decide that for him or herself. So I think that's beautiful, and while ideally I want to say that we have a God who loves and forgives all, I just don't think we can ask other people to feel that same way or to act that same way.
Exactly.
People have a right to feel mad.
Mm-hmm. I've forgiven him because if you can't forgive a person, you can't move on.
So Barbara, where do you see forgiveness coming into play as you reconcile the sexual violence that happened against you and your faith?
Forgiveness is a very personal issue, and I think each survivor struggles with that. But I think the confusion is if you choose to forgive, that's fine, and if you don't, that's fine. But forgiveness doesn't mean you give up the need for justice. And I think people get that very mixed up. Just forgive him. Well, I can forgive him. The guy that molested me is dead. I don't care. It's not worth my time and energy, but people protected him. They need to be held accountable. And if he was alive, he needs to be held accountable.
My healing is not something that's over. It's ongoing. It's lifelong. Another key part of my healing was that I did find the strength to file a civil lawsuit against both the priest who molested me and the bishop who supervised him. Like most clergy sex abuse lawsuits, it went nowhere legally. It was tossed out on the statute of limitations. But it was still an incredibly helpful and healing thing to do because I essentially got his name and his face out there and told the truth.
Healing starts when you admit to yourself you've been abused, expose the abuser, and then go and learn that you should not be ashamed of being the victim of something that you ought to be healed by first stopping it and dealing with it. And don't let anyone act as if you are in any way responsible for what should never have been done to you.
Parents should have better relationship with their kids so their kids can talk to them. When your kid talk to you, believe your kid.
One of the things we've heard many times is a survivor told me that she couldn't tell because her daddy told her he loved her so much that if anyone ever hurt her, he'd kill them. And she said, I knew I couldn't tell because my daddy would kill them and he'd go to jail. But we've heard this time and time again, a very well-intentioned message to a child that effectively silenced them.
Will society ever forgive me? Probably not. Will the victims ever forgive me? I don't know. But I am truly sorry for what I did. I'm truly sorry for the damage that I did.
Abuse happens on all types of levels. It's not always physical, it's not always sexual. Sometimes it's emotional, it's spiritual, and that a lot of people aren't being held accountable. And sometimes people don't want to be held accountable.
There's so many issues around abuse and sexuality and gender and racial and socioeconomic equality that when we're not saying anything about them, we're actually a part of the injustice. So I think that having churches where we're not afraid to speak out and talk about all of these things that are real and that are really happening, even if we're not playing a part or we don't think we're playing a part in them, but looking at how we might be, I think that that's what we're called to do, is to be in conversation and to be willing to ask challenging questions and talk about difficult situations.
We welcome and help people who were sexually violated, either as adults or as kids, in any kind of a religious institution or religious setting. Our mission is to heal the wounded and protect the vulnerable. We're an independent nonprofit group. We're just trying to help people, help them piece their lives back together. And help them expose not just the clergy who commit the abuse, but the clergy who also conceal the abuse so that kids will be safer in the future.
Within the church, we see more changes from the congregation in terms of they are beginning to demand accountability. They're more watchful of their children. I don't think anyone would ever trust priests the way my parents trusted them, probably the way I trusted them with my children. I think they are more aware of the dangers and are becoming more watchful and more educated about child predators. And again, that's due to the victims, to the media, to the attorneys, to civil law. We see very little change in the way that the Catholic officials are handling this, except they have better PR. As a minister, you have an obligation to educate your congregation and to model the right behavior. Every message you send is not only going to help the person that came forward, but the government statistics say 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before their 18th birthday. So you have kids in that congregation being abused by a coach, a family member, a scout leader, a school teacher. And so by setting this good example of we are asking the police to investigate, we will cooperate in every way we can, we beg you to cooperate, you then say to the child, someone will believe me if I came forward. And I think that's incredibly important, that we help kids come forward to stop the abuse and to help them heal.
First of all, you don't punish the organization for the sins of the leader. Just like you don't punish the leader for the sins of the people in the organization. Everybody's trying to work together. Everybody's trying to do the right thing most of the time. God is the one who holds all of us accountable. Nobody has the right to judge anybody.
I'm a big factor on accountability. It's like being a single woman. When I got my girlfriends, it's very hard for me to get with a man and to be disappearing, because I got a lot of girlfriends who like my filter. Where you going with him? What time is it? Why are you with, and why are you wearing that? You gotta answer to somebody. So it's a lot harder for me to sin.
I truly believe that if the God I worship had made us in his image, I can't take second rank to nobody. So I'm not going to embrace Islam until my Muslim brothers and sisters castigate and talk down on Islam that still supports slavery in East Africa. I can't be a Muslim if I know you enslaving Africans in East Africa. You know what I mean? I can't be a Hebrew if I know Falashe Jews don't get a fair shake in Israel. And I can't be a Christian if Eddie Alone is allowed to abuse boys here. So all I can simply be is a child of God.
I like to tell people I'm in ministry with, or people who I might be leading, I can never say anything with certainty. And anytime someone says something with certainty, you should no longer listen to what they're saying, because we're not God. We don't know. That's what's beautiful about our faith. Being that I'm a child of God, I will vehemently say on the side of what God said is. God says simply, I am love. And if God is in love and motion, then I can't do anything to interrupt that love or to disturb it or to turn it dark. And if you do that, then you're not with God. And that's just how I view it.
Sometimes pastors and both congregants, they forget that we're all human. And so you have to find that balance of, you know, being authentic and being vulnerable with your congregation, and your congregation even being willing to accept you as a human being, first of all, and say, we accept you, flaws and all. But yeah, it's a tricky kind of place to be in, not to bleed on the congregation, but to also provide that vulnerability and that human side as well.
The church, the membership, the congregation always has the power. And let's not forget the main power, God. God is the power in the church. And I tend to believe that when people come to church to worship the minister, it's because the power is slipping. When you come to church to worship God, you're right. You got it right.
Everybody wanna win, but we long. In the world of preachers and pimps, they all the same. Prostituting for profits, all in the name of faith. Ain't trying to change the game for good, just wanna bring the light. Soapboxing on my own, trying to save a life. Science cloning the message, but everybody dying. Obama penning the law, but nobody's abiding, huh? Nobody's abiding, making everything public. What happened to private? Guess we need a few confessions. We hire as a pilot. Bishop sharper than the gangster who hired the stylist. Get the rolls in the Maybach. Who cares about mileage? Guess we need a few more bodies on the TV screen. Too many monikers, amen, at the front row. Short skirts, Bible clothes, yelling, give me more. It's hard to be the man of God when you're still growing. Put your seatbelt on, motherfucker, we rolling. Pastor touching Justin Bieber's in the Kelly Rollins. Put your thong on, girl, he preaching in the morning. And they say, and they say, and they say, and they say, and they say. Everybody wanna win, but we know. The congregation want Jesus, but where he coming from? Friar Paul laying hands on every one of them, putting all our confidence.